Universities and schools all over have been struggling with a problem that only seems to be getting worse. We'll be talking about all that and more on tonight's show. Welcome to Radio News Tonight. I'm your host, Adam Capuano. There is a relatively new situation at schools and colleges that was not an issue just a generation or two ago. That is that most students bring cell phones to class. According to a 2013 report by Faculty Focus, a teaching publication, 88% of students brought their cell phones to class, and that number may have increased by now. Whether bringing a cell phone to class is beneficial or a hindrance, or a little of both, and if they should be banned in the classroom is a widely debated issue among students, parents, and faculty. To find out people's opinions on the subject, I interviewed several students as well as 2 communications professors at Penn State University. The one consensus among all people interviewed is that cell phones in the classroom can be a distraction.
If there's students that aren't paying attention but they're sitting in the seat and are distracted either by a cell phone or a laptop or some other technology, there's certainly they don't learn as much from the lecture.
My view on cell phones in the classroom is that students should not use them in the classroom because they cannot pay attention enough to the material that is being discussed, and even if they are, for example, in a studio situation where they don't have a job at that moment, they could still observe what other people are doing to be able to learn more.
Even students concur that having a phone in class is a distraction.
The worst thing about people having their phones in class is that you can watch people, especially if you're in a big lecture hall, you can watch them text each other from different parts of the room or even right next to each other. And it's just really, really obnoxious.
Do I ever use my phone in class? Yes, I do. How often? Pretty much the entire class. And for what purpose? I would say either games, football news. By football, I mean soccer.
You got this crazy device in your pocket that occasionally randomly starts playing and spewing music and podcasts all throughout the classroom.
Professors would prefer students not have cell phones in class, but feel it is beyond their ability to regulate.
Students are distracted by their cell phones. I just continue on with my lecture, and it's their decision whether they choose to be on their cell phones or engage in the discussion.
Most professors definitely discourage it, but I think a lot of them have just given up at this point. Like, there's nothing you're going to do to convince students to leave their phones at home. Like, literally nothing. I mean, if only because they also have to probably use them after they leave class. So
One professor found that allowing students to use their own discretion with phone use was unsuccessful.
I have tried to allow students to use the cell phone during class, and I have noticed that it's terrible if they can use it whenever they want to. For example, when we are explaining things in the studio, a couple of years back, when I had a policy of you're old enough to make your own decisions, you can use the cell phone if you want to, we ended up having to explain things the number of times as the number of students I had in class. So if I had 20, I had to explain the same thing 20 times because people did not pay attention when I was explaining it to somebody else. So yes, it is a big problem.
The problem with student distraction in class is much worse now than it was before students brought phones to class.
I have been teaching for 28 years, and I can see a difference between the past and now in terms of people absorbing the material, and I think it's because of that.
In general, people feel that using phones in the class is really a personal decision, particularly at the college level.
I feel like if somebody wants to use their phone in class, then it's their choice.
I wouldn't have a policy about it. If you want to use it, use it. You don't, you don't.
However, there also appears to be a consensus that having a cell phone in class could be useful if used properly.
I mean, if you need to look something up really quick, like on the internet, you can do that using a phone rather than like bringing a laptop with you. Takes up a lot less space.
Using them as a tool in the classroom is great in terms of having them access online content, things of that nature.
So the best thing about having a phone in class, I find, is to check that your professor is correct. I personally don't trust a lot of my professors. I think that they just say things off the cuff that aren't necessarily true, so I like to verify my information.
I mean, if they used cell phones like clickers or something like that, I really don't know of any way that it could be helpful, except if you were doing research and the teacher said, okay, find out, Google this term or whatever, then that's the only way that I see it, if there are no computers in the classroom.
Some people also feel a sense of security by having their phones with them to use in time of an emergency.
I do get lost a lot and end up stranded in places and in situations where it would be really handy to have a phone. So when I don't have my phone, I'm just afraid I'm gonna end up sitting on the side of the road.
I guess it would, because I would feel like if I didn't have it on me and if somebody tried to call me for some important reason, I wouldn't be, reachable.
Students seem to want to use phones in school because it gives them an alternative to listening to a lecture, and some use it to cheat.
You really can't predict if a class is going to be boring when you go into it. And you don't know if that day the lecture's just gonna be terrible. And you're gonna want something to distract you from it.
I check my phone if I feel twitchy, I guess.
Alright, so the advantages of using your cell phone in class is that it keeps you entertained. Have you ever heard or seen a student use their cell phone to cheat in school? Is this a question? Of course, everyone's used their cell phone to cheat. They take pictures of past exams or just have their notes on it. I know this from personal experience.
So the problem is not bringing cell phones to class as much as it is being mature and responsible enough to know how, when, and where to use them.
I guess the caveat is I teach a class on wireless communication, so it would be a little bit hypocritical if I was too rough on the cell phones. But I think that where it becomes challenging as an instructor is obviously when they're on their phones and not paying attention and Snapchatting and things like that versus being engaged in the lecture.
I think it's a great thing to be able to have access to the information. It's just that you gotta find the right place and the right time to do it. I use my cell phone all the time. It's just not when I am in a meeting or obviously in a class.
People tend to carry their cell phones with them wherever they go, and that looks like that's not going to change. As one professor suggests, perhaps the best way to solve the distraction of cell phone use is to incorporate them into the learning environments so students are actively engaged in learning with them rather than being distracted by them.
Well, I do think there's an opportunity for faculty to leverage the cell phones in the classroom as part of their lecture. That I admit that I have not taken that step yet, but whether we can get students to engage using the technology so that they're not Snapchatting or doing some other things with their phone, I think that's probably the next step. It's great to give them access to content in Canvas and LionPath and things of that nature, but bringing that into the classroom as part of the learning experience is probably the next step for me.
At this point, it seems to appear that people may be addicted to using their phones, and trying to regulate cell phone use in schools is an unrealistic expectation.
Do you think people are addicted to their phones? Yes, of course. Everyone's very dependent on their phones these days. Can you describe how it feels when you leave your house without your phone? Feel naked?
Why don't you go to any bus stop and just look at people and tell me people aren't addicted to their phones? Or like a subway, because every single person's looking on their phone. And it's kind of crazy. And also I personally get these weird, and I've heard other people get them like phantom vibrations where you think that your leg is vibrating because you think you got a text, but it's actually not.
Perhaps the area we should be looking into next is how addicting cell phone use is and the consequences it may have on people. A special thank you to Penn State's communication professors, Professor Maria Balkas and Professor David Norloff, and Sophia, Mo, Brian, and Lane for their contributions to this story.